If you have an interest in world building and storytelling, you've almost certainly heard the terms hard and soft magic. Hard magic follows clearly defined rules which both the characters and the audience are aware of or become aware of over the course of a story. Soft magic operates with less clear limits, and its exact capabilities can't be readily figured out or predicted. These terms come from the author Brandon Sanderson's discussions about his approach to building a magic system. He placed hard magic and soft magic as the two ends of a spectrum, and a given world can fall anywhere between the two, or even include multiple magic systems which function differently. This made a lot of sense, especially in conjunction with Sanderson's three laws of magic, and so naturally people took the idea and ran with it. Over time, the exact details of what each term means have expanded and other concepts have been drawn in. With how much magic will usually affect a setting, hard and soft world building has become a term of its own, which covers far more details not related to magic at all. As this trend continues, certain expectations have become attached to magic systems on both ends of the spectrum, but especially hard ones. While these expectations can help in guiding the development of a good magic system, they can also hinder when taken too far, which becomes especially obvious when looking at places where they have become mixed up with expectations and conventions that were never supposed to apply to magic. The obvious comparison to make when thinking about hard magic is hard sci-fi. Both of them function on the adherence to clear rules. In hard sci-fi, the rules being followed are the laws of physics. Technology in these worlds has to conform to what is possible in the real world, with some allowance for what is believed to be near-future tech or theoretical phenomena that haven't been proven one way or another yet. The series The Expanse, for example, doesn't hand-wave some artificial gravity technology, and instead its spaceships are designed to generate gravity through thrust, and take the realities of zero gravity into account. But the series makes an allowance for a fusion drive system that is beyond our current technology. While these two ideas seem similar in theory, how they're handled in practice and what requirements they have are quite different. At their core, they focus on two different principles. Hard magic needs internal consistency, while hard sci-fi needs external consistency. If it is understood that a wizard has a mana pool, their mana refills at a certain rate, and spells cost a specific amount of mana to cast, then as long as those rules are never broken, it doesn't matter how mana actually works or where it comes from. There doesn't need to be an explanation for why wizards have mana or how they're able to interact with it. While a good understanding of what kind of spells exist is useful, it's not required to explain how spells came to be or how new ones are made. In hard sci-fi, the requirement for detail is far more extreme. But most of these details don't have to be thought up by the author. They simply have to follow how things actually work, with the aforementioned leeway for future theoretical technology. But the more of this there is, generally the softer the sci-fi gets. Where hard magic runs into a wall is in the fact that the magic systems aren't real, and therefore any magic system must break the laws of physics in some way. The only difference is the degree and how noticeable it is. Ultimately, striving for maximal realism in magic is somewhat of an inherently contradictory idea. Of course, most people realize this, and what they're looking for isn't a magic system that could be real, but rather one that feels real in its setting. The way some people try to achieve this, however, is by attempting to be so detailed that an explanation of their magic starts to look like a scientific paper. Alternatively, they will make the magic as true to physics as possible, but that can only be taken so far. One of the most important things I've mentioned is that as well as guidelines and ideas, hard magic comes with expectations. And one of those expectations is that the more specific and detailed it is, the more accurate and well thought out it will be. Readers are generally willing to suspend their disbelief and will overlook background details if they're not called attention to or relevant to the plot. But say you have a very general magic system, where magic is sorted into disciplines that focus on one aspect of the natural world. You have basic elements like fire and water, more esoteric things like gravity and magnetism, and even some conceptual disciplines like order and decay. Since you want this to be a somewhat hard magic system, you have the elements sorted into schools. Maybe creation for magic that summons something, manipulation for magic that simply moves what is already there, and transmutation for magic that changes. Now your characters can be scholars with a deeper understanding of how each discipline works and how they relate. But you want to take it a little further. Wizards should be scientists who studied the natural world to understand their magic better, so fire mages know a little more about fire. They know that fire isn't a substance. A flame is light given off by gases in a combustion reaction. The actual physics and chemistry of fire is horrendously complex, but they figured out the basics and redefined fire magic from creation to manipulation. Fire isn't summoned, rather what's already there is set on fire and moved. Now the magic system is much harder and you've opened up the possibility for a lot of clever tricks and uses of combustion. You've also raised the question of how all the other magic works. A gravity mage before was essentially someone with fancy telekinesis. Now readers are going to want to know how exactly it works. If your audience looks into the magic and science deeply enough to know the details of combustion, there's a decent chance they're also going to look into the rest and come across the term general relativity. Gravity is the bending of space-time, so if a powerful gravity mage lifts a huge weight, do they distort time and the area around it? If you have a light mage, are they now firing actual light beams? A solid beam of light like you see in fantasy wouldn't work in real life. It would reflect off the air and hit everything around it. And then you start to look at the more abstract magic, and everything really falls apart. How does order magic work? Does magic have a consciousness with a concept of order? Is it dependent on the user's understanding? If so, why doesn't other magic work based on comprehension? Why does nature magic affect only living things instead of everything natural? And why would it consider human-made things artificial? A lot of these questions can be interesting to explore and come up with answers to when that is the goal from the beginning. But by treating hard magic like hard sci-fi, and subjecting a world to real-life understanding and expectations, a magic system can quickly become bogged down in details that detract from it. One of the biggest appeals of a good hard magic system is the ability for the audience to make guesses on how else the system could be used, and the ability for the author to do the same, and make their characters come across as much smarter when they figure out some new way to use their powers, while staying within the rules. Once magic becomes bound by realism instead of consistency, it's essentially doomed. No author is a master of every field of science, and that's what you have to be to account for every possibility. If you open the door to hard science, there will come a moment where you make an innocuous decision, like giving a druid a cantrip to forecast the weather, and suddenly your audience is pondering the deep implications of their side note, because that spell implies that either the magic is precognitive and perhaps the future is predetermined, or that nature has a will and makes weather happen, or that a cantrip can number crunch the data to predict entire weather patterns. Obviously, these examples are a little extreme, but only a little. That should not, however, be a reason to overcorrect in the other direction and suddenly make everything vague. And it's certainly no reason to give up on a scientific magic system. There are ways to make this approach work and advantages to doing so. The most straightforward approach is, of course, to avoid the extra implications by only adding features to the magic system once they've been run through a scientific lens. This does run the risk of transforming it from magic to something more like soft sci-fi psionics. The anime A Certain Magical Index features both magic and esper abilities and treats them as explicitly different, incompatible things. Even though the esper abilities look pretty magical, their scientific explanations set them firmly apart from the magic. While this instance is deliberate, it can easily happen by accident when you attach a rational explanation to everything. Adding a layer of obfuscation can help here. If the Esper abilities in a certain magical index functioned exactly the same, with the caveat that you have to have mana to make any of it possible, they would suddenly be magic again. This is somewhat like the counterpart to a hard sci-fi story, introducing faster than light travel and giving a quick explanation about wormholes or compressed space to justify it. What would otherwise break the immersion is fine, as long as everything else is handled carefully. As the goal with hard magic is generally internal consistency and the ability to draw logical conclusions about powers, another approach is to have the laws of physics supplanted by higher laws of magic. Instead of fire magic working via combustion because of physics, physics works by combustion because of fire magic. In the web serial Pact by author Wildbow, magic functions based on a mixture of belief, tradition, and willpower, and the laws of reality are governed by higher magical powers. Practitioners of magic become an interesting blend of mystic, historian, and philosopher, where in order to be effective they need to understand the significance and symbolism of every part of their rituals. The insistence on detail elevates this magic system by letting more experienced characters demonstrate their knowledge and immersing the audience with explanations that make consistent sense and let them theorize about how other powers might work. Overall, the question of how and when to push hard magic is a complex one. Like any part of creative writing, there are no absolute rules, and everything can work if it's done well. Deciding when and where to go into detail will depend on the rest of the world building and what kind of tone and function an author wants to get out of their magic system. At its worst, hard magic can turn into a slog of redundant information that raises more questions than it answers, but at its best it presents a world that feels relatable to the audience, despite being so different from reality. A good hard magic system lets the audience imagine themselves fitting into the world and theorize about how they or their own characters would use magic differently. In the same way hard sci-fi can present a potential future for humanity, hard magic can explore an alternative to our own reality.